All right, so now the M in phantoms for make a decision about the null hypothesis. So to make a decision, we need to compare the p-value to the level of significance. So in this case, our p-value was approximately 0.0142, and the level of significance that they gave us to compare to was 0.10. Okay, so this is definitely smaller than 0.10, which means we reject HO. Okay. That probability in that tail was so tiny, which meant that our value of x bar was far enough from the claimed value of mu that we think it's an unusually low value. So we're going to reject their claim and conclude instead that we think the mean is lower than what they stated. So finally, our last step here in phantoms is to state a conclusion in the context of the problem. So our final step is never to leave the wording as we reject HO. Okay, nobody knows what that means or what the context and the story of the problem was. So in this case, we're going to say that there is significant evidence to conclude. So if we're going to reject the null hypothesis, that means we think the alternative one is actually the true statement. So we're going to say there is significant evidence to conclude that the mean lifetime of all these types of batteries, which were what, XJ35 batteries, is less than 500 days. Now, we didn't conclude that simply because we had an x bar of 490, which was less than 500. It's because we had an x bar that was lower than 500, and it was enough lower to make the p-value really tiny. Okay, so that's it. That's what a hypothesis test looks like. The acronym PHANTOMS will help you remember the 8 steps that need to go into a formal hypothesis. In the next section of this chapter, we're going to see how to use the following tests on the TI-84, where actually that probability computation is going to be made for us with just one button click, which will be nice. Something called the one sample t-test and the one proportion z-test. So one more comment about the conclusion and interpretation. So first, the conclusion is that we either reject HO or we fail to reject HO. And why was it said like that? So it's because we never accept the null hypothesis. So when we failed to reject it, we didn't say we accepted it. And the reason for that is because all of the computations are made assuming the null hypothesis is true, and then seeing how unusual it would have been to see our sample results, or ones even more extreme. So since the procedure originally starts by assuming the null hypothesis is true, you can't use this procedure to prove the null hypothesis is true. It's an underlying assumption to begin with. Okay. All right, so that was one really, really, really long problem to try to kind of outline and bring to see how all of these concepts that we have been working on from chapters 1 through 6 all come together. Okay, these last few examples here are kind of some short ones that just focus on some specific pieces that are kind of new in thinking about hypothesis tests. So in example 7.1.3, so focusing on the conclusions and why they are what they are. So in the U.S. court system, a jury trial could be set up as a hypothesis test. To really help you see how this works, we're going to use the O.J. Simpson case as an example. So in the court system, a person is presumed innocent until he or she is proven guilty. And so this becomes our null hypothesis. Okay. So O.J. Simpson was a football player in the 1970s. In 1994, his ex-wife and her friend were killed. O.J. Simpson was accused of the crime, and in 1995, the case was tried. The prosecutors wanted to prove O.J. was guilty of killing his wife and her friend, so that became the alternative hypothesis. So the null hypothesis in our court system, we assume you're innocent until proven guilty. So O.J. is innocent. of killing his wife and her friend. But the alternative is going to say that O.J. is guilty of killing his wife and her friend. Now, in this case, a verdict of not guilty was given. Okay, that does not mean that he's innocent of this crime. It means that there was not enough evidence to prove he was guilty. So many people believe that O.J. was guilty of this crime, but the jury did not feel that the evidence presented was enough. Okay, so it's kind of like our previous example. It wasn't just enough to have a sample mean of 490 that was less than 500. Okay, so that's some evidence, but we need enough evidence to be able to reject H.O. Okay, so the verdict in a jury trial is always guilty or not guilty. So we'll see that these two decisions only differ by one little word, which is not. And so we're going to see when we write our conclusions, we're either going to say there is significant evidence to conclude the alternative, or we're going to say there is not significant evidence to conclude the alternative. So as we write our concluding statements, they're much longer than these jury verdicts, but again, they only differ. The two ways we can conclude at the end of the day will only differ by this one little word, not. Mm-hmm.